So we're here today with Art Froehlich at the Advancing Women in Ag Conference. Art is the president and CEO of AgriView Inc. So Art, you had a presentation this morning at the show, and I have some questions for you based on that. So why do you think participating in a board is important?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I asked that very same question to the group of women I talked to this morning, is why do you want to be on the board? And I got a wide variety of answers. But I think it's important if you want to be involved strategically with an organization. There's no better place to be than with the board. Now, you're obviously not going to be involved in management. That's not what boards do, or at least in most cases. And most boards that try to get involved in management are usually fairly short-lived, or either the board leaves or the management leaves, one or the other. But I think it's very important, especially if you're dealing with grower organizations or farm or associations, or even corporations for that matter. You can become very intimate with an organization strategically, what their policies and procedures would be, what their image should be, and you can participate in all of those very, very top-level conversations without getting into the day-to-day operations. I kind of find that fascinating.
Yeah, sounds like it is. So do you think the structure of today's boards is evolving, and how is that changing to meet today's business needs? How are boards changing?
Boards are very much evolving and changing, for the most part. I wouldn't say it's happening across the board, but yeah, they are evolving and changing in dramatic ways for a couple of reasons. And I'm going to talk specifically about agriculture. That's the only boards I've ever sat on, and the only boards I sit on now have all been agricultural related in some fashion. I think for a period of time, when we were looking at agricultural boards, we would try to select agricultural people who were very, very good at production. Grew big crops, perfect livestock, efficiently, and that tended to be what prompted you to be on a board, or be selected for a board, or that's who would put up their hands. Now the world has changed. We've become more focused on the consumer, and the agriculture industry had a tough time dealing with that. So yes, boards are definitely evolving. As I say, at one time, if you were going to be a member on an agricultural board of some fashion, it was because you were a great producer. You produced high quality, high volume, efficient, whatever the commodity might be. But the marketplace and agriculture has evolved. We're become much more dictated to, and I use that word dictated because that's really what it is, by the consumer. And so consequently, we need another much more broad experience on our boards than we once had. You need people on your boards who are more knowledgeable about the marketplace, and I'm talking about not the commodity marketplace and transportation and handling, but what's the consumer looking for? What are the big issues? We tend to disregard, or we have tended to disregard, what non-farming people think about us. Those days are kind of over, you know. Whether we agree with traceability or whether we agree with animal welfare, the consumer has indicated that that's a big issue. And we better be prepared to address that. So you need a different skill set on your boards than we did have in the past.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but paint a picture for me of how many women serve on boards these days in the agriculture industry. Do you have a guess of that?
I don't have a specific number, but I have a guess, and I would say that it's a very small percentage. Okay. Growing, but still very small. At one time, it was almost non-existent. Now, there are some women who've sat on agricultural boards 30 and 40 years ago, but that's very rare. Mm-hmm. But I don't have a specific number other than to say that those numbers are changing. More and more women are sitting on boards now in the agricultural industry, and that every year I think that's becoming more and more common, and that's a good thing. Just as mentioned earlier, that the industry has changed, more consumer focused. I think women bring a certain attitude and experience and understanding of what the marketplace is looking for that is valuable, so they bring that skill set to the board. Not that men can't, but women, I think, are inherently ready for that sooner, and it's a bigger part of how they think and how they view the industry and how they view the food industry.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the thinking between the genders can be different, and I think both are needed on boards for sure.
Absolutely, there's no question. Having a diverse gender and a diverse age on a board brings a whole different perspective to that board discussion. Mm-hmm. And the way you view topics. And it's healthy and it's good. I think there's studies that I believe Harvard has done where boards that have a certain female component on the board tend to be more successful.
Oh, wow.
So I don't have the specifics, but I do believe I read that someplace.
Excellent. The problem, maybe it's not a problem anymore, but sometimes women are afraid to put their hands up, to say, I want to be involved. So how can women effectively express their interest to serve on a board?
That was the big topic of our conversation this morning. I'm a firm believer that women do not willingly or readily put up their hand. The first advice I gave the group with this morning is if you are interested, say you're interested. Express that interest. Men are much more willing to, well, I'm not quite ready yet, but I'm going to take a leap of faith and join this board anyway. And my perspective, it could be dead wrong, but I think women are probably a lot more cautious and are not as willing to take that risk, and they view it as a risk. Men are more prepared to take those risks. So I always say, put up your hand if you're interested, and then once you do that, then go about preparing yourself for when you get the ask, and that is become financially literate. Every board you sit on has to deal with financial statements. I don't care how big or how small it is, whether it's a non-for-profit or for-profit, you will have a fiduciary responsibility to look at the financial statements, so you have to be financially literate. So get that under your belt. Number two, understand governance. It's not one of these hairy-fairy kinds of things you do. There's a lot of meat and potatoes in the governance process. Understand it. Number three, build up your network. The earlier it can start, the better. An old boss of mine told me one time, the only people who need contacts are those who don't have them. So if you have a lot of contacts, you really don't need them. So build up your network, build up your contacts. Find a mentor, male or female, it doesn't matter, and help them get you those things that I just mentioned: financial literacy, understanding board governance and all the intricacies that go along with that, helping you with your network, and getting you prepared for that next step. I mentor a lot of young people, male and female, not in startup companies, but also many of them are quite interested in joining a board. I find that I can talk to a 27-year-old new recent university graduate who's been in the workforce for 3 months, who's a male, and he is already thinking about what boards he'd like to be on. Whereas very rarely do I get young, usually if it's a female that approaches me to talk about being on a board, they're in the mid to late 30s at the earliest. There may be good reasons for that. I don't know all of them, but it's something I have noticed. So express an interest and then prepare yourself. The ideal situation you want to be in is that you get calls to join a board, as opposed to you always sending out resumes every time you see an ad someplace.
So you yourself have served on numerous boards, we know that. So what has been your greatest learnings from your time on different boards?
The greatest learning that I've had from being on boards are the people around the boardroom table. You will find that if you sit on successful, well-run boards, you will learn a great deal from your colleagues on the table. You will learn respect. You will learn how not to group think. You will learn how to handle confidential information. You will learn from all the experiences that you can from the folks around the board table with you. And the interesting thing is boards bring people in to bring a different perspective. They're looking for people who have not just a perspective only on the business that they're in, which I think sometimes is a mistake that agriculture makes. If we have a commodity board, we only want people who are intimate with that commodity. It might be better to bring people in from Asia to join the board so you can understand where the markets are going. It might be interesting to bring food services in. And so I find that a lot of the boards that I sit on, we tend to look for people who are outside of what would be considered the norm for that company or that organization. And I think that's incredibly important. Also, it makes the board much more knowledgeable as individuals. And of course, the other thing that I've learned from dealing with boards is how to deal with very difficult situations. Ultimately, when it comes, the board only has one employee, and that's the CEO or the president. Sometimes boards have to make very difficult decisions. And if you have a good board, it's never a pleasure to make those tough decisions, but it's well thought out and usually a well-respected decision can be made. So it's always about the people.
So to wrap up, This is a difficult question perhaps, but I think you can sum it up. What are the top 3 things, top 3 pieces of advice you would give to someone who's thinking about serving on a board?
Number 1, make sure the organization you want to join as a board member, you're in line with them. You want to join an organization that is reputable, is in the business that you're interested in. It's doing things that you feel good about. That could be my first board I ever sat on in my life was the 4-H Council. That was easy because I was a 4-H member all my life, and so I knew them. I loved the organization, and so the first thing you do is make sure you know the organization, know who's on the board already, do your due diligence, know who the chairman is. The most powerful person on the board by far is the chairman. Make sure you know what that chairman is like, what kind of a revolving door there's been there. So do your due diligence on the organization. That's number 1. Number 2, prepare yourself as best you can. Make sure that you have the skill set that board's looking for. Make sure you know what the job is. Different boards are responsible for different things, even though we say they should only be on a governance point of view. Some boards do trickle into management, and if that's the case, make sure you understand that. I personally don't like to sit on those kinds of boards, but nonetheless, sometimes it does happen. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is make sure you know what your risks are. And many people join boards thinking, okay, now I've made it. But along with being a board member, there's a lot of risk. You find out 6 months down the road, the company has been making statutory deductions from payroll, GST, EI. You find out that payrolls have been missed. You as a board member are responsible for all of that. So I used to joke with some new board members when they say, well, I'd like to be on a board. I said, well, how attached are you to your house? Because at some point in time, you may be detached from it. You are fiscally liable for a lot of things. So you have to make sure, is there director and officer insurance? Is there indemnification if it happens to be a government board? So understand your risks and make sure that you are comfortable with those risks, because they could be very, very expensive. Boards are being criticized more now. Could be everything from compensation levels to misuse of funds to whatever the case is, and we've all seen examples in the papers. So legally, more and more people are taking on boards, and they'll go through the corporate veil to go directly to board members. And the first rule of thumb is you find out who on the board has got the most money, and that's who you go after. So, so just understand your risks, make sure you're well prepared, and know the organization you're joining.
It sounds at the end of the day like it's a great opportunity for some people who have the wherewithal to try.
It's a wonderful opportunity. I thoroughly enjoy being on almost all of the boards I've been on. Some have been more of a challenge than others. I've learned a great deal from being on boards and the people that sat around the board table with me. But it's not for everybody, absolutely. And it takes a lot of work. It's not just meeting 4 times a year for a day. Multiply that by at least 2 or 3 times to prepare for meetings. Nothing worse than going to a board meeting and finding out that half your board has not prepared for the meeting. You know, you see them opening up the binders, and you can just tell by the way the pages pull apart that those board books have never been opened before. You know, so you've got to be prepared to work to be a good board member. And if you are a good board member, other board members will respect that, and you can have significant influence on an organization.
That's great. Thank you very much, Art, for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.